For Session Update, I'm Shannon Loerhke. Current Minnesota law bans the discussion of Real ID, a 2005 act of Congress mandating additional security to driver's licenses and other forms of identification. That law is likely to change this session, and with me to talk about it is Senator Scott Dibble. Thanks for joining me today, Senator.
Thanks, Shannon.
So you were part of the 2009 law prohibiting any discussion of Real ID.
Right.
What were your concerns then, and have your views changed since then?
Well, I was one of almost all the legislators in the entire legislature, all but one, I think, who voted to enact that prohibition on planning for and implementation of Real ID. And the concerns were shared by lots of state legislators around the country. A number of states took that same action. And the concerns were several. One was the fact that this was enacted by Congress without any consultation with states. It was done by amendment, kind of under the dark of night, and it had a lot of implications and questions that went unanswered around, security and data privacy and, appropriate levels of access by government into what basically amounts to private data. What are the safeguards against security breaches? How much is this going to cost? All of our states, no dollars followed those requirements, those sorts of things, and the effort to enact the prohibition was an effort to introduce some leverage into a negotiation with the federal government to maybe gain some concessions around these ideas and have a better crafted law. Everyone believes that security is a good thing and improving security is a good thing. And we shared that goal, but we wanted to really deal with some of these considerations. My views are continue to be the same. We actually have gained some ground, not as much as I would like. So when we do take up this effort to repeal the prohibition, we're going to have to put in some things in place that address people's concerns.
Right, and so are there unintended consequences that you fear if the 2009 law is overturned and we move forward and it's implemented and therefore Minnesota does comply? Are there unintended consequences that you foresee?
Well, for sure, we're going to be put to a lot of expense that we wouldn't otherwise, and I think it's a shame that the federal government isn't helping us pay and defray for that as much as they should. They are doing more than they were back then, so that was a little bit of a success. But who's going to bear that cost? It's either going to be the people who are buying their driver's license, or the taxpayers out of the general fund, or something like that.
So and it's possible that the cost of a driver's license may increase.
Or we'll just kind of broadly distribute it broadly, and have it shared by all taxpayers to the general fund. We haven't figured that out yet. Okay. I do think that we really, I don't know for sure, but we do need to know for sure before this is all said and done what the kind of the data privacy concerns are and what the provisions are for ensuring against data breaches, because we could become less secure if these databases that get linked up with each other state to state, kind of in a quasi-federal database of everyone's identification, are breached, and that happens. We had a whole fingerprint database that was breached just a few months ago. So what are the protections against misuse of the information by the government itself and intrusions from external coming into and stealing that data? So
one of the concerns Senator Limmer mentioned was that the Department of Homeland Security head person is an elected or an appointed official, meaning it's somewhat of a political appointment. Does that also concern you too, that there could be that sort of access?
I'm not so concerned about that. I trust that the Secretary of Homeland Security is going to be a professional on into the future, whether appointed by president or a Republican or Democratic party. There's a vetting and confirmation process. So I'm not as concerned about that. What I am concerned about is a provision in the law that says that the director or the Secretary of Homeland Security can designate a purpose for Real ID of their own choosing with no limitation and just make it so. The sky's the limit there. So I hope the law that we do pass says, should the purpose of the Real ID be designated for something that we don't know about today, we're going to take that back under consideration at the state level and make a determination at the state level whether or not that's appropriate for our purposes as well.
So a friend of mine who flies frequently just carries their passport. They're still concerned that they're going to have trouble boarding a plane. And just to be clear, Minnesotans can already purchase for an additional $15 the enhanced qualifications for their driver's license.
Right.
Would you recommend that Minnesotans take those extra precautions now, even though we have until January 2018, or do you think they're maybe worrying needlessly?
I think people at this point are worrying needlessly. I think we're going to come into compliance with Real ID in plenty of time, and actually I think the final hammer drops in 2020. So we'll have 4 years to come into full compliance. We'll get an extension, we'll get a waiver, et cetera, as we make good faith progress towards compliance. And so I don't think anyone needs to rush out and pay for the enhanced driver's license, which is the driver's license that lets people cross the Canada border and the Mexican border,
right.
As well as, by the way, Caribbean countries and Bermuda, or carry their passport. That's just not necessary. So people who are really worried about their ability to travel domestically on airlines don't need to worry so much. I think we're going to get this done, and certainly we don't have anything to worry about for a couple of years.
Right, until 2018. So do you expect that this will be one of the first things that comes up when session starts?
I anticipate what will happen is we'll pass an initial bill, which will get the Department of Public Safety on the path of gathering the data, communicating with the Department of Homeland Security, preparing some information for us in order to pass a second bill, which then is kind of the full authorization and deals with all of these policy issues that we need to contend with. You know, what are we going to do for people who don't want to be a part of the national database, which is not a national database, but all our databases will be linked up to each other.
Right.
People who want what we're calling a liberty license, kind of in a joking fashion, but people who want a non-compliant, kind of second-tier, non-compliant license that can be used only for the purposes of driving in the state of Minnesota. You wouldn't be able to use that license to get on an airplane, but if you opt for that license, you can have that. We need to button up some details in our own laws that would not allow us to comply in other parts of the law. We need to figure out how we're going to pay for it. There's a complicated discussion around deputy registrars. We have, private offices that issue take in all of the applications for driver's licenses, motor vehicle titles, that sort of thing. We call those deputy registrars. And there's a whole complicated set of issues around whether they can receive the documents in secure enough fashion, and do they have some expenses that they're going to go to that we need to provide for. We have just a lot of stuff that we need to deal with.
So there's a lot to discuss and more to come.
Right.
Thank you for joining me today, Senator.
Great. Thanks, Shannon.